Today I'm going to be talking about the development of cardiorespiratory endurance, the body's physiological response to exercise, the developmental changes in both the anaerobic and aerobic systems, performance beginning at childhood going through adulthood. We're going to also take a look at long-term training effects, as well as the effect that disease has on endurance performance. So, what is cardiorespiratory endurance? In a nutshell, it's the body's ability to supply enough oxygen and other fuel to the muscles during activity, and involves the heart, lungs, and blood vessels. Overall, it is a reflection of an individual's ability to sustain vigorous activity. It can be short bursts of intense exercise, a long period of maximal or submaximal training, or a combination of both. And recent studies are showing there's a worldwide decline toward physical fitness. Adults are adopting a sedentary way of life, and with technology ruling all, kids are falling into suit as well. And there's a high percentage showing risk factors for preventable diseases. Physiological response to short-term exercise. So during a short, brief period, 10 seconds, the body depletes local reserves of oxygen and sources of energy that are stored within the muscle, creating an oxygen deficit. This type of activity is called anaerobic or without oxygen. And when you're talking about anaerobic power, you're talking about the rate at which an individual's body can meet the demand for short-term intense activity. Anaerobic power is the maximum oxygen deficit that a person can tolerate. Respiration and circulation increase to bring oxygen to the muscles, and as the length of exercise grows longer, anaerobic and aerobic systems contribute to the activity. And after 3 minutes, aerobic processes are going to eventually meet the demand of exercise. Developmental changes in anaerobic performance are related to body size, the ability to metabolize fuel sources in the muscles, and quick mobilization of oxygen delivery systems. And some of these factors change as growth occurs. So some developmental changes in anaerobic performance in childhood. Smaller quantity of energy reserves is less output of anaerobic power versus adults. Children are smaller, so their energy reserves are going to be small to match their body size. As muscle mass increases, so do the energy reserves. Better tolerate the byproducts of metabolic process. The mean and the peak anaerobic power improves with age. Continued. As children grow, they have better neuromuscular coordination and skill that contribute to improved anaerobic performance. And the capacity for energy production also improves with age. Maturation levels should be considered when looking at studies that pertain to children. Some developmental changes in anaerobic performance in adulthood. Once the body size reaches that of an adult, anaerobic performance remains fairly stable. Improvement in anaerobic power and capacity is attained through training alone. Anaerobic systems don't produce energy as quickly. This decline is associated with the loss of muscle mass, and by the age of 75, anaerobic power was recorded at a decrease of 50%. All right, let's take a look at anaerobic training for children and adults. In children, the results of training studies are inconsistent. Pre-adolescents demonstrated anaerobic power with training, and improvements are also going to come with the improving anaerobic capacity. In adults, master athletes maintain anaerobic performance as they age, and long-term training of sufficient intensity is going to help maintain anaerobic performance. Now we're going to take a look at physiological response to prolonged exercise. Prolonged exercise is going to use the aerobic system, which is going to use the oxidative breakdown of food stores as well as the local reserves that are depleted within the first few minutes of the activity. The term aerobic is with oxygen, and when you're talking about aerobic power, you're talking about the rate at which long-term oxygen demand is met, and aerobic capacity is the total energy available to meet the demands of the activity. Continued with physiological responses. An increased respiratory rate brings more oxygen to the lungs, making it available for diffusion into the bloodstream. Increased cardiac output allows more oxygen to reach the muscle. The body achieves the increase through an increased heart rate or increased stroke volume. And a limiting factor to continuous vigorous activity is in the heart's ability to pump the blood that's required to meet the oxygen demands of the working muscle. All right, now we're going to take a look at changes to aerobic performance in childhood. So smaller heart, smaller stroke volume, and which is usually compensated through a higher heart rate. Cardiac output is less than an adult. They have a lower blood hemoglobin, lower tolerance for extended periods of exercise. As children grow, their heart size increases, their hemoglobin concentrations rise, the rate at which oxygen extraction reaches adult levels. The body size and maturity levels are important factors affecting their ability to exercise for long periods. Now we're going to touch on maximal oxygen uptake. This talks about the largest amount of oxygen the body can consume during aerobic work. It is strongly related to lean body mass and increases linearly from age 4 years to late adolescence in boys and to age 12 to 13 in girls. Going to be the charts that we're looking at, the relationship between maximal oxygen uptake and age. The chart on the left shows the trend between ages 6 and 18 years old. Boys and girls have similar in maximal oxygen output until around 12 years old. The boys have a higher average overall. After that, it plateaus. And then when we take a look at the chart on the right, which is B, we're showing maximal oxygen uptake in relation to body weight stays the same throughout childhood and adolescence in boys, and declines in girls, which may be affected by adipose tissue increasing. Now we're going to talk about changes to aerobic performance in adulthood. Average maximal oxygen uptake peaks in the 20s and then decreases throughout adulthood. Athletic and active adults seem to maintain higher maximal oxygen uptake versus sedentary adults. Some structural and functional changes within the cardiovascular system and some effects they have on performance. Maximum heart rate. The maximum achievable heart rate declines with age. And the difference is about 188 beats per minute for a person in their 20s and 168 for a person in their 50s and 60s. Stroke volume may or may not decline with aging. Research has produced both outcomes. Cardiac output, which is the product of heart rate and stroke volume, tends to be much higher in adults who train aerobically versus sedentary adults. Blood pressure, older adults' arteries are more rigid and they tend to resist the volume of blood the heart pumps, thus raising the resting pulse pressure and systolic blood pressure. When we take a look at the blood flow and hemoglobin content, it seems to be maintained in older adulthood, but anemia does increase. When we look at lung volume or respiratory function and structure, elasticity of lung tissue declines with age and expend more energy in breathing. A decreased vital capacity is well documented, with the average decrease being 4 to 5% per decade. And the change in muscle mass, since maximal oxygen uptake is associated with loss of muscle mass and the ability of muscles to use oxygen changes. When we take a look at endurance training for children, as they continue to grow, their maximal oxygen uptake is going to increase. And we must distinguish whether the increase is attributed to growth or if it comes from a training program. And when we take a look at endurance training in adults, we show that maximal oxygen uptake declines with age, and active adults have a higher maximal oxygen uptake versus sedentary adults. Aerobic training programs for children. Individual maturation status and growth levels should be taken into consideration. Hormone levels associated with puberty must also be considered, as they have an impact on training success. Aerobic training outcomes are small and improvements are best shown in pre-adolescence, and aerobic training produces significant improvements after puberty. Here we're going to take a look at maximal oxygen uptake changes in children with training, and they take a look at 7 sample studies. 3 found a significant increase in maximal oxygen uptake by the training group over the control group, but the other 4 found no difference after training. Training was not associated with a higher maximal oxygen uptake in pre-adolescence. Aerobic training programs for adults. Well, we show that maximal oxygen uptake increases, as well as stroke volume and maximal cardiac output. Oxygen is better extracted from blood at muscle sites, and ventilation improves. Now we're going to take a look at long-term effects of training. Now, there seems to be limitations on available studies, but evidence does suggest that activity in childhood has positive lifelong benefits. Promoting an active lifestyle from a young age into adolescence could help them to remain active as adults. An important factor of endurance is current activity level, and endurance capacity decreases when people discontinue training. So the phrase, if you don't use it, you lose it, makes sense with the effects of endurance training. So now we're going to take a look at the effects of disease on endurance performance. Diseases affect performance. They could be cardiovascular, of the pulmonary system, infectious, or neuromuscular. We show that short-term infectious disease reduces working capacity. We never want to place the individual at an increased risk, so we must take a look at their exercise plan and develop it carefully, set with acceptable expectations, and monitor them closely. So we've learned overall that as the body grows, endurance improves. Maturation level must be accounted for when studying adolescence, and training adaptations are lost if the practice is discontinued. Thank you for your time.